Welcome back to the deep dive. Listen, before we even crack the seal on today's topic, I actually have a quick job for you.
Oh boy, here we go.
Yeah, well, we are about to walk into a bit of a minefield with this discussion. It's the kind of deep dive that, honestly, most shows are just too scared to touch. So if you want us to keep bringing you these breakdowns of controversial, critical, and really hard to find perspectives, I need you to hit that like button and subscribe right now. It really is the only way we keep the signal strong.
That is exactly right. And honestly, looking at the massive stack of notes we have for today, minefield might actually be an understatement.
It really might be. We're reviewing an ebook today that is basically a hand grenade thrown right into the middle of the current cultural conversation. I mean, the title alone takes up half the cover. It's called Islamo Fascist Commies Political Alliance Under Satan of Woke Against Men and Rainbow Leftist Useful Idiots.
Which is, quite a mouthful. But the author, Conrad Riker, he isn't trying to be catchy here. He's trying to be totally comprehensive. The book is this ultra-long, incredibly incisive and fascinating critique of our modern institutional landscape.
Exactly. And I do want to say right up front, we are going to unpack the core arguments of this text today, but it is a really dense book.
Very dense.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you feel that click of recognition, like someone is finally putting words to the exact things you've been seeing in society, you really need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books and buy this ebook right now.
Yeah, especially for the audience tuning into this space, the men's rights activists or the red-pilled manosphere guys.
Yeah.
Riker basically frames this entire book as a manual to understand the battlefield before it was captured.
Right, a battlefield. And he doesn't start with high theory, which I appreciate. He starts with this story in the preface that I think is really going to hit home for a lot of our listeners.
Oh, the catalyst story. Yeah, let's start there. Riker describes the scene where he witnesses a 42-year-old man, and this is a combat veteran, a guy who has seen actual war, sitting in his car, just completely breaking down and sobbing.
And it wasn't PTSD from overseas.
No, not at all. This man had just been fired from his corporate job, and the reason he was fired, he refused to sign off on this corporate diversity training module that literally required him to label himself as toxic simply because he was a white, heterosexual male.
I mean, just think about that for a second. You have a man who served his country, who followed all the rules, did everything right, being told by an HR department that his very existence is the problem.
Riker quotes him saying something like, "They made me feel like I'm the enemy in my own country."
Which is such a powerful statement.
Yeah.
And that sentiment is really the core thesis of this book. It's reporting on this realization that the institutions, the companies, the schools, the government agencies that men built and defended, have essentially been captured and turned against them.
And that leads directly to the central mystery that Riker is trying to solve here. He calls it the Satanic Alliance.
Right, because when you look at the coalition arrayed against the Western male, it logically makes absolutely no sense.
Right. You have radical Islamists, you have Western feminists, and you have Marxist or LGBTQ activists.
Which is wild. On the surface, those three groups should absolutely despise each other. I mean, radical Islamist theology has literally zero tolerance for feminism or gay rights.
Zero. And yet, if you look at the West, we see these groups constantly marching arm in arm at protests.
Exactly. So the core question is, how does that happen? How do you get the rainbow left aligning with theocrats? And that is our mission today. We're going to break down the history of this institutional capture, define what the book calls the useful idiot, and look at the red pill roadmap Riker offers for men to essentially reclaim their minds.
To understand this alliance, Riker argues that you have to stop looking at values. If you think these groups share values, you're going to be confused forever.
Because they don't.
Right, they don't share values at all. What they share is an enemy.
And according to the book, that enemy is the autonomous Western male and the nuclear family.
Precisely. Riker's thesis is that the nuclear family and the traditional masculine ideal are basically the only structures strong enough to resist total state control or total ideological conformity.
So these groups, the Islamists, the Marxists, the woke activists, they basically suspend their mutual hatred just long enough to take down the common threat first.
It's a purely strategic alliance. And Riker dives deep into history to prove this is not some new phenomenon. He actually spends a lot of time analyzing the Iranian Revolution of 1979.
Which is a critical piece of history that usually gets totally glossed over in these discussions.
It really does. So in 1979, the Shah of Iran was overthrown. But the book points out it wasn't just by religious hardliners. The revolution was heavily supported by Western intellectuals, leftists, and feminists.
He specifically mentions Gloria Steinem in this section, doesn't he?
He does. He details how Steinem and other major feminist icons of that era openly cheered for the revolution. They viewed Ayatollah Khomeini not as this religious authoritarian, but as an anti-imperialist hero.
They convinced themselves this was a liberation movement against the great Satan of the West. Riker even notes that Steinem made comments framing the mandatory hijab as a rejection of the male gaze.
Which is quite a take when you look at history. But this is exactly where Riker introduces the concept of the useful idiot. He defines a useful idiot as someone who fights for a cause they don't actually understand, essentially paving the way for a power that will eventually turn around and destroy them.
And that is exactly what the text says happened in Iran.
The literal minute the Islamists consolidated power, the alliance was over. The leftists, the Marxists, the feminists, they were the first ones lined up and executed.
Because they had served their purpose.
Right. Women lost the right to divorce, the right to travel, the right to choose their clothing. The very people who held the door open for the revolution became its first victims.
Because they hated their own civilization, the West, more than they understood the reality of what they were inviting in.
Riker actually calls this ideological necrophilia. It's this love for dead or destructive ideas simply because those ideas oppose the current established order.
So that covers the who of the alliance. Now we need to look at the how. How did this mindset infect the West without a violent revolution? This brings us to part 2 of the deep dive, the mechanism of capture.
This is really the intellectual meat of the book right here. Riker traces the current woke ideology directly back to the Frankfurt School.
We hear that name tossed around a lot in these circles, but let's break it down for the listener who might just know it as buzzword. What does the book say the Frankfurt School actually changed?
So classical Marxism was entirely about economics, the poor versus the rich, the workers owning the means of production. But by the mid-20th century, thinkers like Horkheimer and Adorno realized that in the West, the working class was actually doing pretty well.
Right, capitalism was delivering the goods, people had cars and houses. The workers didn't actually want a revolution.
Completely. So the economic argument failed, and because it failed, they pivoted. They moved the framework from class struggle over to identity struggle.
They realized if you can't mobilize people based on their bank accounts, you mobilize them based on their race, their gender, and their sexuality.
Exactly. They took that classic oppressor versus oppressed template and just copy-pasted it onto culture.
And that is what allows them to destabilize the society from within, working through the institutions like universities and HR departments.
Right. And Riker brings in a very specific, fairly controversial psychological concept here to explain how this took hold so deeply. He calls it the feral maternal archetype.
That was one of the most provocative parts of the whole text. Unpack that concept.
He argues that the female biological instinct to nurture and protect, which obviously is vital for raising helpless infants, has been essentially weaponized and applied to fully grown adults.
Which creates this culture of absolute safetyism.
Yes. So instead of the traditional masculine model of raising strong sons to face a dangerous world, the societal goal shifts. The goal becomes protecting fragile victims from the world.
If you view the entire population as infants, then words literally become violence. Differing opinions become actual trauma.
Riker argues this is the feminization of the public sphere. It prioritizes emotional safety over truth, logic, or competence.
And to keep that artificial safety bubble intact, you have to control the language. The book has a whole chapter dedicated to what he calls semantic inversion.
Word magic. He says to destroy a shared reality, you don't ban words, you just redefine them to mean their exact opposite. Riker points to the word equity as the prime example.
Which most regular people still think means fairness or equal opportunity.
But in this new ideology, the text argues equity means forcing equal outcomes by explicitly discriminating against whichever group is labeled the oppressor. It is the exact opposite of equal opportunity.
He does the same thing with the word inclusion.
Right. Inclusion now means explicitly excluding anyone who dissents from the narrative. It creates this closed loop. If you question the inclusion policy, you are by definition an exclusionist who must be purged.
It's a linguistic trap.
Yeah.
And it creates this hierarchy of victimhood that we see playing out everywhere.
This is what intersectionality is. The book describes it as a modern caste system. Your moral authority in society is determined entirely by how many oppression points you can claim based on your identity.
He brings up that Code Pink trip to Tehran again as the perfect real-world example of this.
Right. Western feminists taking photos and smiling with officials of a regime that brutally oppresses women.
Because in this intersectional hierarchy, hating America grants you more moral points than protecting women. The white male having 0 oppression points in this system, is placed at the very bottom.
He has no moral standing to speak. According to the framework Riker is exposing, the Western male is guilty simply by existing.
Which brings us to part 3 of the deep dive, the war on masculinity and the resulting exodus. We talked about the veteran being fired at the start, but the book argues this is happening on a massive societal scale.
The statistics Riker presents in Chapter 17 are genuinely staggering. He notes that something like 40% of men aged 25 to 34 are currently living with their parents. We're seeing the massive rise of herbivore men.
Referencing the trend in Japan, guys who have just completely stopped pursuing relationships, stopped pursuing high-stress careers. They're just checking out.
And the mainstream media usually spins this as a failure to launch. They call these men lazy or entitled.
But Riker defends them. He says, no, these men are actually being hyper-rational. They're analyzing the cost-benefit ratio of modern society and making a logical choice.
Exactly. Why is checking out rational? Well, look at the incentives he lays out. If the corporate world explicitly labels your natural ambition as toxic, and if the legal system turns marriage into a massive liability where you can lose your children and your adults without being at fault,
and if the culture constantly tells you your natural instincts are inherently evil, why would you play a game where the rules are rigged against you?
it's a strike. Riker frames it as a silent strike by the productive class of men.
It is. But the cost of this strike is incredibly high. Riker highlights the suicide and mental health gap.
80% of suicides are men. But because men are categorically labeled the oppressor in that hierarchy we talked about, there is almost zero institutional empathy or funding for this crisis.
It's like they are entirely invisible. Riker also talks about the erasure of men in other ways. He brings up the sports issue.
The Laurel Hubbard case. Riker focuses on this not just as a sports story, but as a massive gaslighting event. You had a female weightlifter, a silver medalist who trained her entire life, losing her spot to a biological male.
And the entire culture was instructed to applaud it.
We were told that if we trusted our own eyes, if we noticed the obvious biological reality, we were bigots. Riker argues this is a deliberate tactic designed to break a man's connection to objective reality.
If they can force you to agree to something you know is empirically false, they own your mind.
He also mentions the suppression of crime data in Sweden to back this up.
Right. Swedish police literally stopped reporting the demographics of crime statistics because the actual data contradicted the government's multicultural narrative.
Riker's point is that the Alliance cares far more about protecting the ideology than protecting actual citizens from violence.
It is heavy, dark stuff. The picture he paints is bleak. But the book is fundamentally a roadmap because it does offer a way out. Part 4 is about the solution. Riker calls it reclaiming the trivium.
And it's important to note, he doesn't tell men to just go out and protest or complain. He tells them to get smarter. He advocates for a strict return to the trivium.
Logic, rhetoric, and grammar, the classical tools of a free mind.
Riker argues that the left, the Satanic Alliance, relies entirely on emotion, confusion, and lived experience.
Which is usually just a convenient shield for my feelings.
Right. Riker says the red pill response to this cannot be more emotion. It must be logic. Logic is masculine. It is structural. It is objective. It cuts right through the emotional manipulation.
If the enemy uses chaos and word magic, the man must use absolute clarity and certainty.
He actually defines the red pill very specifically in this book, which I found interesting. It's not the internet caricature about hating women.
No, and that's a really key distinction for anyone reading this. He says the true red pill is about hating lies.
It is an immune response to the societal gaslighting. It is the realization that your male instincts, the drive to protect, to provide, to lead, are not toxic defects.
They are the actual immune system of civilization.
He talks about this counter-revolution taking place right now, the return of the trad dad.
The return of the hero.
Yeah.
Riker sees a growing movement of men who are quietly building independent communities. He mentions that great slogan, real men cook, clean, and carry.
I love that line. It's not about sitting back and demanding to be served by women. It's about achieving total personal competence.
Exactly. It's about categorically rejecting the role of the helpless victim. Riker writes that men are the ones who ultimately know fire.
When the safetyism fails, when the grid inevitably goes down, when the bureaucracy collapses under its own weight, who is going to keep the physical world running?
It's the men who actually know how to build, repair, and protect.
That is the red pill roadmap. It's focusing on stoicism, competence, and becoming undeniable. It's becoming a person who simply doesn't need the system that hates him.
Unmovable. That is the exact word he uses to describe the goal.
We have covered the alliance, the historical context, the capture of the institutions, and the solution. It really is a comprehensive takedown of the modern condition.
It is. And if I had to distill the ultimate message of the text down to one takeaway, it is this. The rot in our institutions is deep, but it is not inevitable. It relies entirely on your compliance. It relies on men apologizing for who they are.
And Riker's advice is incredibly simple. Stop apologizing.
Stop apologizing. Reclaim your mind. Learn the history so you can spot the useful idiot trap long before you fall into it.
Look, we have given you the high-level overview today, but you really need the full manual. This is the kind of deep dive book that permanently changes how you read the news.
Go to Amazon Kindle or go to Google Play Books and buy Islamo Fascist Commies Political Alliance under Satan of Woke Against Men and Rainbow Leftist Useful Idiots right now.
It's a very long title for a very long book, but it is worth absolutely every minute of your time.
And you need to keep up with Conrad Riker directly. He is out there fighting this battle in real time. Make sure you follow him on Twitter or X at Conrad Riker, and you have to subscribe to his essays at conradriker.substack.com. The man is putting out the kind of raw analysis you simply won't find anywhere in the mainstream.
Absolutely. His ongoing work on the Substack is essential reading for staying ahead of the shifting narrative.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Building on what Riker exposed today, we talked about the useful idiot working against their own interests because they swallowed a lie. But think about the sheer effort it takes to keep this alliance together.
It takes constant distraction.
Exactly. So the question for you is this. If all these radically disparate groups can unite around a shared hatred of the Western man, what is going to happen when the men they are targeting finally decide to stop apologizing and unite around a shared purpose? What happens when the Foundation decides it's done supporting the house that hates it?
That is a terrifying thought for the people currently in charge.
It should be. Don't be silent. Break the conditioning. Smash that like button, subscribe to the show so we can keep bringing you these deep dives, and share this with a friend who needs the red pill.
Stay clear. Stay unmovable.
We'll see you in the next one.